Welcome to our CSD series. I'm Daniel Lin. Now, one of the changes that Scrum Alliance is making to their instructor program is they're asking their instructors to go through a process where they have to teach some learning objectives from some of their classes on the fly. So basically, Scrum Alliance is going to just pick a random learning objective, in my case from CSD, because I teach the Certified Scrum Developer classes, and I will get a couple of minutes to prepare a lesson and then immediately have to teach it within 20 minutes. So to practice this, I'm going to create some of these videos. I'm going to randomly pick a learning objective. I'm going to give myself a couple minutes to prepare the lesson and then teach it to you. So I'm going to try to do 2 of these per video, do them Tuesdays and Thursdays for a couple of weeks. That should prepare me for my review pretty well. And hopefully you get to learn some interesting things from the Certified Scrum Developer course in the process. So here we go. Let's pick our first random learning objective. I have here a little app I built real quick that has all the learning objectives in it. And I'm just going to click on the button to select a random topic. Right. And that topic is so from the integrating continuously topic, 6.3, describe at least one advantage of an automated build, test, measure pipeline. And you'll notice here it says comprehension. That means, in Bloom's taxonomy, we have a couple of different levels. So, I may have knowledge at a lower level where I can just repeat something back. In this case, comprehension is I have to demonstrate understanding. I'm sorry, by I mean the student has to demonstrate understanding of this topic. All right, so I'm going to pause my video for a moment. I'm going to give myself that couple of minutes to decide how I want to teach this on the fly. The constraints that they give me is I can use flip charts or sticky notes, and that's it. So that's interesting. We'll see how that goes. I'm not going to use flip charts in this particular video because they're really, really expensive. Instead, I'm going to use a digital whiteboard for these videos. But same basic concept, drawing. All right, so my 5 minutes has expired. I'm actually recording this after I recorded my lesson because I wanted to get myself that I did my 5 minutes and then immediately into having to deliver the lesson. But I'm flipping it in the recording so I can prep a little bit for what you're going to see. I'm going to give the lesson. I'm going to be showing on a digital whiteboard drawing while next to my camera and giving a little bit of explanation on this topic, as well as speaking the meta a little bit. So there's 2 different things that you're going to hear. One is things that I might say to the people evaluating my instruction, and then 2 is things where I might ask something of the class. So in this particular simulation, the people evaluating the instruction will be acting as students. So I may engage with them like students, ask them different questions, but then I'll kind of explain this is what I'm expecting to hear. And if I don't hear it, this is what I'm going to say back in to prompt different thoughts. So it's a little bit weird. It's like a simulation of a simulation. I hope you can bear with it and still get some value out of it. As we're going through, if I ask a question, please feel free to hit pause and jot down what your answer to that might be, and then see how that plays in the rest of the class. Would love to hear your feedback on it as we go. All right, so I'm going to begin my 20-minute time box for, bear with me, get this timer started. My 20-minute time box for teaching this learning objective. We'll begin this now. One of the things as we're doing this lesson is a little bit of meta. What's happening in here? So I'm going to be teaching a lesson on continuous integration, continuous delivery, what falls into the broad umbrella that we commonly refer to as DevOps. We'll have probably done a lot of different exercises, but I'm going to go a little broader than this learning objective, specifically to teach what it is, because I believe that the value of it becomes self-evident and I can validate that through interactions with the student. So let's kick off this lesson. We want to talk about, you hear common terms, continuous integration, continuous delivery, or maybe a build pipeline is becoming more common as DevOps becomes more integrated in different teams' processes. So I want to talk a little bit about what this is, because for people who haven't done it before, this may feel a little bit almost mystical. There's a lot of big terminology around it, and I want to simplify it down because it's actually really, really, really simple, right? So when we talk about a build pipeline, all we're really talking about is there's some place, there's some code repository that people check code into. This is pretty standard. If you've done any software development, you've checked your code into somewhere. So I want to have here, I'm going to show a couple pictures of, imagine these are developers, not necessarily known for my incredible art. Bear with it. So I've got developers and we're coding on our machines, right? And I've got some sort of software repository here. And as I get a little bit of code done, I'm just going to check that into this repository, right? And if anyone's ever done this, you probably know that this can be disastrous, right? I add code and then I add some more code and I add another person's code on top of that, and I have merge conflicts, and there are ways to address that. That's a little out of scope for this lesson. What we want to talk about instead is what happens next, right? So this person, call them developer number one, they're going to check their code in. And in this build pipeline, what happens immediately, as soon as that code's checked in, is I'm going to pull that code out, and I'm going to go to this server. So this is my continuous integration server. This is some sort of build server. It's a very production-like environment. And I'm going to simply build my application, right? Ooh. So I'm going to build my application. And step one is, does it build? Right? So if it does build, cool, I can go on to step two. But wait, what if it doesn't build? Well, I can immediately give feedback to this person. Right? So why is it valuable to get feedback at this point? And in our lessons, or in our simulations, we'll have a chance to ask the class this question. Obviously, we don't have a class. I'm recording this for YouTube. So maybe people will come out and say, oh, it lets you know that your stuff worked or didn't. It lets you know if you had a merge conflict. It lets you know, right? Now I realize that your code repository also tells you if you have a merge conflict, but it can also, we can have ones that don't really emerge until we try to build the application, right? So I find this out before anyone else has checked any more code. So if I'm getting this feedback now, and this is kind of the key thing to hit on, we can let a couple different people share ideas, but the key thing to hit on is that if I get this feedback now, I know that the problem has happened now with my check-in. It was building before, it's not building now. That let me go into the places where I've changed and identify where the problem exists, right? Similarly, maybe it goes and it builds perfectly fine, but then this person goes and they commit a little bit of code, and then that one fails. Well, I know, great, there's some feedback. And he's going to be able to see, oh, well, maybe I had an assumption, developer one changed something, it was working before, now developer one changed something, I committed mine, now it broke, now I'm going to go talk to developer number one in order to have a constructive conversation about where did we conflict, right? We can have that conversation very, very fast. I'm not trying to play detective 3 weeks later when I want to do a deploy. All right, so we've got the build stage. Next stage in continuous integration, this is incredibly important, is testing. So I am going to run a test. So this is all of my automated unit tests, acceptance tests, what have you. These are all going to run against the build that I just built from the last check-in. So in the simplest terms, imagine that this happens every single check-in. I realize big enterprise applications, you may not build the entire thing and run all the tests against everything. That might simply take too long. There are strategies for that, but for the sake of this class, let's keep it simple and just say in basic continuous integration, I build and then I run a test against that build. So now, not only do I know from my source code repository that there are no obvious merge conflicts, there are no problems that emerge when I try to build it, and it still runs and passes all of the automated unit and acceptance and integration tests, whatever tests you happen to have built into your environment, right? This is what we commonly call continuous integration, right? So there's one term defined. So what about this continuous deployment? So let's say I have a working build, and every time someone checks in code, I know my build works, and it passes all of the tests. What might I want to do now? And we'll pause, we'll let people have their input, we'll have people ask questions, but what we're going to basically come to is I'm going to go out into some sort of environment. Now, pure continuous delivery, we would say this goes out to production. And there's no reason it can't. And that's important to say in a class because it's important to understand that that's possible. And there are a lot of different ways to mitigate risk when we do this. But it is possible that as soon as I check something in, it is built, it is tested against, and if those tests pass, I put it out and I have customers. I am having realized value right now. Okay? So CI, I build and I test it. CD, continuous delivery, I deliver it out. Now let's say you go, hey, this is way too much risk. We work inside of this government agency and we want to, it just we don't want to confuse our constituents who are using this. We don't want to have experiences change on the fly that really upsets the people who use our software. That's fine. You might use part of this to just go out into a staging environment, a production-like staging environment, or a beta environment where people who do want to interact with that can. So you can kind of do this to degrees in order to determine, or get the best value out of it. All right. So this is the basic idea of continuous integration, continuous deployment, right? And keep in mind, at every single stage of this, there's an opportunity for feedback to go back into the users, into the developers. So, okay, you recall from that learning objective that there's actually build, test, right, deploy, and then measure, right? So this is something, if we talked about maybe XP back in the day, this is exactly what we talk about for continuous deployment, just this. But now I've got all these things out in the field. What do I do with them? Okay, they're out there and hopefully everyone loves it. Well, no. There's no reason you can't keep getting feedback. So I want you to imagine that this isn't just, right, this used to be, anyone remember back in the day where we had CDs and we would put those CDs inside of a little box and we would send that to UPS and we would ship those CDs out to our customers, and that's where we would have our happy customers getting their amazing new features, right? This isn't the world we live in anymore, right? So in those kind of cases, we'd have to use surveys to determine whether or not people were enjoying our new features. We'd have to, maybe do customer calls, that kind of thing. But we don't have to anymore. We have a lot more capabilities. So instead, we have this whole other section that we've added, measure. And maybe a real quick poll from people, what would you measure? And if you're following this on a video, please go ahead, hit pause, and ask yourself that question. Maybe jot down a couple of things. What are things that you would measure now that you're out in the environment you're in? Maybe it's a web application, maybe you're distributed across, a a grid of computers that, and it auto scales and all this other garbage, right? What are you going to measure in that? Well, some of the things that we might look for is we might look for environment performance, right? Um, we might look for new feature use. We may have some built-in customer satisfaction measures. And what was the purpose of the feature initially? Maybe we were introducing a new user experience that was supposed to allow customers to get to the data they need faster, and we know how long it used to take, and now we're going to check. Um, we're going to check if that time has gone down to a less amount of time and see how much time we've saved our users, right? So old CI/CD still absolutely valid. This is a relatively simple concept. If you've ever built anything by command line, that is exactly what these systems are doing. So in a real classroom environment, one of the things I would want to do is I want to actually bring up on a screen and I would show you one of these environments and I would show you exactly what commands are running, and you'll notice that, like, if you're using a React application, you're going to run npm build. That's how you're going to build it. And then npm test, and that's how you're going to test it. So the exact same things that you would type at the command line, that's all this is doing. And then it's reading the output and then using that to trigger an email back for feedback or continuing on to the next step, right? Nothing crazy here. But now we're going to add on to this, in addition to the old CI/CD, a measure step where I start looking at how this is impacting my environment, how it's impacting my users, and does that match how I expected it to impact my environment and my users, and what actions do I want to take from there. All right, I'm going to wrap up this particular learning objective. This actually kind of goes, like I said, a little bit past those learning objectives. And if you'll recall, I'm going to do a little bit of debrief now, as I have a couple of minutes. Give you some insight. For me as the instructor, my goal with this was to get the idea of what this whole build, test, deploy, and measure pipeline looks like. Let people understand that. In my opinion on this is sort of self-evident, to be able to comprehend the value of this. What I did to check against that in the teaching of the learning objective is that I want to create some of those places where I ask people, why would I want this feedback? Why would the developer give this feedback? What would be the benefit of this, as opposed to waiting for the release day to make sure all the merges are good, build it, test it, and send it out. Asking people to jot down the things that they would want to measure, right? So in my experience teaching this particular topic, people very quickly come up with those value measures. So I have a very high level of confidence that the people taking this class would make those connections themselves. And even if one or two people didn't, as their classmates did, that would help them make the connections. However, obviously I'm listening for it, so if I don't hear those things back, I'm going to provide it and ask them to maybe talk about how this works inside of their environment. Do you see this? How would you see this benefit being useful for your specific context, so that I make sure that they understand the value that that's delivering. All right, and with that, we're going to call it a wrap for this video. I was going to do two different learning objectives, but now as I'm looking at it and editing it, it looks like it maybe makes more sense to do one. That's going to end up between the lesson and some of the explanation. It's going to leave a bit of time. I will release another one in just a few days. I hope this was enjoyable. I hope it was informative. It was good practice for me. So hopefully it's a win-win. Please leave comments, reach out to me on LinkedIn, let me know what you think, any feedback on the points I'm hitting or not hitting, how you might approach it differently. I really value it. It'll help me moving forward with both teaching this class and going through this exercise with Scrum Alliance. Have a great day.